Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. Let's. Our next session is to be taken by Mr. Robert Bernstein. Mr. Robert Bernstein is my senior colleague at the American Red Cross, so I'm so honored he's here for the second session. So before we bring Mr. Robert on board, let me take our research reporters through the profile of Mr. Robert Bernstein. He joined the American Red Cross Greater New York in April 2022 as a member of the External Relations. His responsibilities included community enlargement and communications. He later became a member of the Regional Volunteer Services, which culminated in his designation as an outreach lead. In mid-2023, the Director of Service to the Armed Forces or International Services asked Mr. Robert to work on the region's international humanitarian law program and to lead service to the armed forces outreach. As a result of his work with IHL, he was promoted to the regional team lead as well as volunteer leadership partner for the service to the armed forces director. Mr. Roberts has supported the national headquarters IHL program, including working on the Clara Baton competition and the Youth Action campaign. His efforts led to his selection as IHL Dissemination National Lead in February 2025. In late 2023, the American Red Cross made the decision to establish a Jewish TMRG within the DAY program. DAY is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I believe. Mr. Roberts was invited to join the development team and remains a steering committee member. Thank you so much, Mr. Roberts, for joining us. Research reporters, please do me the honor to welcome your colleague, my boss.
No, that's not true.
My boss to the second session of the Research Reporters Workshop. So the floor is yours, Mr. Roberts.
I appreciate that, Fajimbola. Good afternoon, actually, good evening, everybody over there on the continent, various parts of the continent. And I have worked with the African community here in New York for many years. And I've also worked with people who come back and forth from the continent. And the first thing I'm going to say to anybody is lesson number one, that is a big continent with a lot of different cultures and a lot of different people. And I always want to remind people who have not spent a number of hours or days with people that it is not the same across the continent of Africa. And we have to always, as you know, from the north, from the west, who have not worked with the global south, we have to take that into account. The other thing I'm going to say before I begin discussing my situation is one of the most important things I've learned working with the African community here is that we must look, observe, and listen twice as much as that mouth of ours runs. Because if we're not good listeners and we're not good observers, we miss so much. And that is going to create fallacies in our approaches and working with different cultures down the road.
Exactly.
So that's just a little bit of a lesson I learned. I'm not saying everybody has to follow it, but I will tell you, I grew up in New York City. It is a place unlike any other place in the world. Excuse me, and I have been to some other places of the world, and I appreciate very much the things that my family gave me. My father was a physician, and my mother was a nurse, and my family is in the medical profession. I have a sister who's a medical professor, and a niece who's going for finishing her residency. So, we are also a very academic family. My father took me at a very young age. Whenever opportunity comes to learn something new, even if it's in a new job, and you may say, I don't want to do this job because it's not what I really want to do with my life, oftentimes provides you with experiences and maybe even contacts for something for the future. So I always say to people, never shut off an opportunity when it comes to you. Really sit and consider it before you say, you know what, that's not my field. I don't have any interest in that field, because you never know what comes out of those opportunities. And so I grew up in New York, and I went to university. When I got out of university, I was having a good time. I was working for stores. I was making money. I wasn't a great salesman at the outset, but I was learning how to do the sales work that needed to be done. And my dad, who was a physician, as I said to me, now, he goes, I didn't send you to the university to be a salesman. I sent you to the university so you could have a professional career. And I've worked very closely with a lot of Nigerians here in New York and in both Lagos and Abuja. And I know a lot of young people who come from families in those cities. The family wants them to take a professional career. So, they say doctor or a lawyer, tech.
Exactly.
Uh, Tech is acceptable now. Back in the day, maybe accounting. But if a young Nigerian comes home and says to his dad, I want to become a philosopher, or I want to become a professional ballet dancer, or I want to become an artist, the father will look at him or the mother and say to him, are you out of your mind? You need a career that you can fall back on. And that's something I've learned over the years from professional and personal experience with colleagues and friends. And I have to say, I have my doctor, my personal doctor, is Nigerian, and we always joke because I say to him, you're working in the medical field, but when do you use that MBA degree, or when are you going to finish up that law master's degree, and what are you going to use it for? And he says, I don't know. Maybe down the road I'll need it. So I've learned that, and it's something that we've all learned when we come from different families of cultures, that they want their children to get education and to be successful. And it's important to me also right now because we are living in a time where there's a lot of upheaval in the world. And yes, the world has always been a very, very uh, challenging place. But right now, it seems like it's very, very tenuous for a lot of people in the way we approach things. And a lot of the programs that came from the West and from the North to the continent are now being slashed or removed. And that's very unfortunate and sad. It makes me very sad because these programs were very successful. We had a lot of programs with young people from Nigeria and from Kenya and from Ghana and the other countries of the continent could come to the States and get education and learn and observe and maybe get experience in jobs. And we're closing ourselves off. The second thing I'm very, very concerned with is that we are looking at education amongst young people as a way to make money. So we have this thing. It took me a long time to understand that being an online influencer is legitimate. I thought for the longest time. I mean, an online influencer, they get dressed up and they talk about products. But I realized this is a way to really motivate young people, and it's through influencers I think we're going to accomplish one of the goals I have, which is to change this attitude that education, for education's sake, is not important, because it is very much important. And if we go to university and we want to be a doctor or a lawyer, but we don't take philosophy classes or fine arts classes or history classes or cultural classes, we become people that are very, very much narrow in our approach in life. And I was listening to the woman before us, the lawyer, and she was talking about her experience in the hospital with doctors who didn't listen to the woman. They would tell women, this is what you need to do, as opposed to saying to the woman, what do you think? Do you have any ideas or thoughts? To me, a good doctor is always a doctor who listens to the patient and says to the patient, how do you see your treatment plan? And those things have to happen. Those things must happen in order for us to be responsive in a good society. And absolutely, what she says is true. We're transferring a lot of our wealth to the very top of the chart, where people have a lot of financial wherewithal. They have a lot of money to spend, but the people in the middle are the ones that are really keeping the economies and the countries moving. Of course, in the government, you have your president, your prime minister, and his ministers or her ministers. But the people that actually keep the government going are those civil servants that stay on after a president leaves. And if we're not providing them with the resources, whether it's medical care or child care, we're going to find ourselves in a situation 10, 12, even 15 years down the road that we have a lot of gaps. And I don't want to go off on that because I'm really here to talk about my career and my journey in humanitarian service. But I just feel like a lot of times when I go out there, it's important for people to understand where I'm coming from. So as I said, I grew up in New York, and eventually I went on and became trained as a teacher, and I worked as a teacher in the schools of New York City. Public schools in New York are unlike any other schools in the world. You can walk into a room and people laugh. And when I tell them, I said, sometimes you go into a classroom, it's like the United Nations or the African Union in miniature, because you have kids from the Caribbean and African kids, and you have kids from Europe, and you have kids from, Arab countries, and you have all these kids together, all coming with their needs. And obviously, when a parent makes the decision to come to the United States, oftentimes they're leaving a very lucrative or a great life back home, and they have to start from the bottom. And so these children are there, and the parent's goal is to give the child a very, very good uh, upbringing. And unfortunately, in order to do that, sometimes they have to make a lot of sacrifices. So oftentimes it becomes the job of the teacher, the role of the teacher, to acclimatize and acculturate that child to America. And I can remember many times when I was finally out of the classroom, but working as an administrator and as a dean, where we have children who came from other parts of the world who were acting out. And I can only imagine these young kids, whether they're Nigerians or Kenyans or Jamaicans or, Balkan kids, Asian kids who are coming to the United States, and everybody around the world was, oh, I love American culture, the TV shows and the music, but that's over there because all you're seeing is the videos or the movies. But when you're here and you're going to and from school, you're also confronted with the other um, negative or bad parts of American culture. And, you've watched these TV shows of high schools where kids, are always pushing and shoving against each other. But in reality, a lot of times it's a lot more than that. So I learned a lot about culture from working in the schools. I also learned a lot about how the teachers react to different cultures. And some teachers are very wonderful and warm and nurturing teachers. Other teachers don't want to be bothered. And they don't want to accept the fact that people come here from different places and they need time to adjust. And so I spent about 26 years working in the schools. And at the time, as I was leaving, I was becoming a journalist. I worked in Washington. I worked for some magazines. And I also worked a lot on working with the military. Washington, obviously, is very important that the military has a lot of Air Force and military bases. So I'd go to work with them. And then eventually I came to New York. And this was around the time President Obama was running the country. And I remember I was out in a market, a green market, vegetable market, and there was a man selling T-shirts, and there was a humorous picture of Obama doing something. And I asked the gentleman, "Can I take a picture of your shirt and put it on social media?" He goes, "I'd love that." And we started to talk, and I found out he was a man from Jamaica who wanted to bring all these young people together, but to do things in a positive way. And he said to me, his goal was to have music and fellowship and understanding and learning, but in a positive way. So he wanted music to come out that didn't have all kinds of nonsense in it, foolishness and nasty words. He wanted something to be positive. And I worked with him for about 2 years on that. And in the course of that, I met some people from different publications that were publishing here in the States from Africa. So one of those was a magazine from Nigeria called Africa Applause, and I worked with them. And then I worked with a guy from Nigeria, a guy named Bobby Olela. He had a website for Nigerians and Liberians and other African people living in New York where they could get information. And he asked me to take that website over and become the editor. Did that for a few months. I met this woman, Fatima Diallo from Guinea and from the Gambia, and she was running a beauty contest for young Gambians and young Ghanaian women here in the States. And she wanted me to work with them on communications. And I said to myself, well, it's a beauty contest. This is, I'm not really into that. I'm into like, journalism. And so, I said, let me give it a shot. And we worked for 2 years together. We became very close. She had just divorced her husband, and she was living in the States with a young child in the Bronx. And we became very close. And she relied on my counsel and my advice. And I worked with her on a couple of the beauty contests. And I realized she wanted to go back to Guinea and to Gambia because she wanted to get married again and have another child. And she just wasn't feeling life in New York. So she left. And I worked with another young woman from Ghana. And she set up an organization called Girls Education Initiative of Ghana. I'm not going to sit here and tell everybody on this call, the barriers to women in working in various countries of Africa, because I'm sure all of you have those experiences. But she wanted to ensure that all the girls of Ghana who had the potential to go to high school, pay the school fees, and then go on to a university degree and become productive parts of Ghanaian society. And, it was a very, very wonderful cause. It still exists. We had a New York office that I ran for her for 2 years. And that meant I had to go to the United Nations headquarters to represent them there, which was a very wonderful experience. And I learned so much from this woman. Her name was Elizabeth Nyarko, uh, or Elizabeth Patterson, as she called herself in the States. And one of the things she told me was the stories of all these young girls who had so much potential, but because of the financial constraints, all these young girls who could be great leaders, great doctors, great lawyers, great political leaders, great tech IT people were stuck having to go to the market with mom to sell, the vegetables and the products. And they couldn't go to school because obviously all of you here know about the issue of the school fees that many countries have, which prevents a lot of young people. And so I worked with her for the 2 year period, and we remain great friends to this day. She came to New York about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and we met for lunch, and we hadn't seen each other in a very long time. And she brought her two young children with her, two beautiful young children. Um, and she and I spent a good hour together, an hour and a half. And I tell you, when we were leaving and parting, there were a lot of tears. So one of the things I've learned too in the course of my work with the African community is that when you work with them and you're honest with them and you're, reliable with them and you treat people here in the community properly, they see you as a part of the family. So the people of New York's African community have said many times to me, you know, we need you. You're part of our family now. And that's one of the greatest things I think I've learned in reaching out to communities where I wasn't working as a paid staff member or a career member, but the basic volunteering where you go because your heart tells you to do what you need to do. And that's the story of the Red Cross, because the Red Cross was founded with the understanding that most of the people that work for the Red Cross are volunteers. It's 95% volunteer. Only 5 to 6% is paid staff. And we know the work they do around the world, the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, whether there's flooding in say South Africa, or there's a tornado in Georgia in the United States, or there's an earthquake in Japan, or there's a volcano in Hawaii, or in Europe and Italy. Those people go out and they do it because they love the work they're doing. It makes them realize how important this work is. And I don't have to tell anybody here who's ever had contact with a Red Cross or Red Crescent society, that the people that you meet um, are some of the finest people you're ever going to meet, because these are people that do things again. And I keep repeating this, and I'm probably going to repeat it again. This comes from the heart. And so, for my 4 year Red Cross experience, I've spent, working in international humanitarian law, which I'll talk about in a second. But I've also worked in other areas, so I got to see the job that everything entails in that job. So, for example, in New York, we have a lot of fires in homes. And so that's what most of our response to disaster is. But, I could wish I had a camera with me. I could walk outside. We had snow the other day, a big snowstorm, and we have 18 inches of snow on the ground. And so there are plenty of people that have issues: no heat, no water, hot water, some people living on the streets. There's another thing too we've taken on, and I know this may be something that people outside the U.S. don't understand, but people here in the United States, particularly single people, have a lot of love for their pets, their dogs, and their cats. And obviously, if you go to places around the world, you see a lot of cats, stray cats in the street. But we have people out today from the Red Cross working with rescuers, because there are a lot of cats that are very, very much out on their own and suffering from the cold. So if you can imagine, we spend money on trying to rescue these cats and bringing them someplace warm so they don't die. And to me, that's humanity. And, Red Cross, we work on 7 principles, and humanity is the first principle. The principle of humanity means we are there to serve anybody who has a need. And that means we serve them because we feel that it is the highest calling for somebody to volunteer and serve in a humanitarian function. And as I said, you don't need me to tell you, when you've seen Red Cross doing humanitarian things. Obviously, there's some conflicts going on. You talk about Sudan, and we talk about the DRC, terrible, horrible conflicts. And I've worked with people on those conflicts in a volunteer capacity and as a journalist. And, when that plane lands with the Red Cross on it with food or support or medical care, it's very much welcomed. Um, so one of the other principles is impartiality. So if I work with a population or I go to a country, I work with everybody. We don't selectively say, oh, I'm going to go to a country like, you know, France, and I'm only going to work with people that speak French. Anybody who doesn't speak French is not getting help. That's not how we work. And we're also very neutral, because we want to make sure that in a conflict, we're able to see the victims of the conflict from both sides. So it is important to me to let everybody out here know that you can reach out to your local Red Cross, Red Crescent Society. There are a tremendous amount of jobs. And I understand a lot of you are reporters and writers, and you're doing education. And that's another thing I learned. When I left teaching in schools, I thought I was never going to be involved in education. And actually, every day, it's a two-way street. For a great teacher to be that great teacher, you have to be open and listen and have to learn to be educated by other people as well as educate. And my education doesn't just come from from listening to TV. My education comes from listening to people like you. Listening to that previous speaker, listening to Miss Fajambola when we have our meetings, listening to before I got on this call, I was on a call with the group that she's working with us on, and I'm listening to a lawyer from Lesotho, and I'm listening to another young man who's got a very, very strong desire for certain things to be noted about Africa and the positives. And so, we were in a call, and it's always wonderful to hear when I say something, somebody else says to me, the way you said that, I really appreciate the fact that but that's learning and it's listening. And, I don't always have to agree with everybody everything everybody says. Your previous speaker said a lot of things I understood. Some of the things I did not agree with her on, but that's fine, because we learned what she has to teach us. And just because we disagree with it doesn't mean we don't understand it. And she is 100% correct, particularly for reporters and journalists and people who are storytellers. You got to be sure about your facts. And, there are a lot of outlets there: Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. All of these outlets have people who claim to be experts who put something up there, and then you turn around and you include it or incorporate it into work you're doing. And then somebody says, oh, listen, look, that's not what it is. That's not true. And then you, as a journalist or as a storyteller, have your reputation besmirched because you didn't do the hard work of checking. I mean, one of the things I always laugh about is somebody is angry at something that's going on in the world. So they'll put up a picture and say, look, this is why I'm angry. And then it turns out the picture is like 5 years old, and somebody just threw that together. And then, you didn't check it. And she's absolutely right. Make sure you check your sources and check all of your work. Now, getting back to, what I do with the Red Cross, my job is international humanitarian law. That is the law of armed conflict. It is only the law that applies to conflict in the world. And right now we have more than 130 conflicts in the world that are underway right at this moment. I've mentioned two of them on the continent. That is Sudan, which is a very, very horrible conflict for those of you that are aware. And the other conflict is the DRC, which has been going on for many, many years. I can remember in 2014, 2015, 2016, that's 10 years ago, that I was reporting on going to breakfast in Washington, D.C. with different parties to that conflict and sitting in meetings, and how horrible the things are that were being said. And here we are 10 years later, and we're still facing those same conflicts. So we work with conflict and we try to find ways to do two things. We're not there to create peace in the conflict. That's for other folks to do. But we're there to protect the children, the women, the elderly, the families, and the men too, who are involved in this conflict, who are innocent. And we're also there to ensure that when the conflict ends and people have left, because many people leave a conflict zone and go to another country, that they can come back and they can resume their lives. So that's my role. Now, if you ask me how can I volunteer, my first step to you is go locate information. If you have access to the web, look up the website of your local society, whether it's Nigerian or Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana, and see where they have offices. And then reach out to them. And I tell you to reach out to them because this is a volunteer organization. And if you have a special skill, if you're a gifted storyteller, if you're a good speaker, if you're an excellent writer, if you're a photographer, if you're any of these things, if you want to work in disaster because you have a desire to go and help people, then that's an organization for you. And I'm sure, sometimes you have to be a little persistent. Somebody will tell you, oh, yeah, we're not taking any applications now. Come back in 6 months. No, you don't wait 6 months. You wait 6 days. And then you send them another email or another call. And you keep being persistent. And then, when you get an opening and your foot is in the door, you don't let the door push your foot out and close the door. You figure out a way to get them to see who you are. And in my case, I was lucky because I worked with a gentleman who was he was a soldier and he had been retired. And we would sit and chat about his experiences. And then he was like, you know so much about the military. He goes, where did you serve? And I said, well, I didn't really serve in the military at all, sir. I said, I just worked in Washington with the Air Force, and I learned a few things. And that's when he asked me to take over this program of international humanitarian law. And I haven't looked back since. And actually, one of the first things I did, which I thought was marvelous, was they sent me to the United Nations here in New York for a week to represent the American Red Cross when there was a meeting of countries of the world to end the use of nuclear weapons. And so we had 14 or 15 societies from around the world. And because this was in the United States, I was representing the American Red Cross, which was the host society. And I got to spend a week with people from many, many countries. It was a marvelous experience. I still reach out to those people today, and it has led to a lot of different opportunities. And I know I just said this, but I'm going to repeat it again. Always, always, when somebody offers you a job or an opportunity, an experience, don't reject it outright. Say, this is not for me. I can't do this. I don't want it. Hold on to it, examine it, study it, and see, maybe can I come down and see what the operation looks like? Ask them, if you want me to take this specific job, can I come down and see how things work there? So you have curiosity. You know, people who you're talking to for jobs and occupations love curiosity, they love motivation, and they love people who say, you know what? Yeah, let me give this a shot. And the other thing too is when you take on a job, be open-minded. Don't go in there and say, I'm taking it just because, that's nothing else. Now go in there, take your job. If it's a volunteer job, especially because the experience you get in volunteer jobs goes on to that CV later on when you're getting out of university. And I don't know how many of you planning to go on to professional careers. So I don't want to give advice on that. But I do want people to understand that it is up to you where you go in life. Yes, there are always obstacles and there are always things that are going to prevent you from getting where you want to go. And you can't always have a positive attitude every day. Somebody says, brush it off. Don't worry about it. No, I don't buy that because there are things that are going to make us upset and make us feel down. So you have to figure out a way to deal with those situations that doesn't put you in an emotional roller coaster, or it doesn't tell you, listen, I wanted this job, I didn't get it, but you know what? Let me see if there's anything I can take out of it. Nobody says you have to go in the next day and say, well, I didn't get the job, but it's okay because my life is going to be fine anyway. If that's not you, then don't say that. But if you can learn something from the reason why you didn't get the job, if you can reach out to the person who offered the job and said, why didn't you give it to me? Sometimes we can't do that. Sometimes it's something we have no control over. I mean, I've been in interviews where somebody said to me, I'm not hiring you. And person said to me, I don't like the way you cut your hair. I mean, there are people that make decisions in hiring for simple things. And, now everybody has something to say. And, you know, if you didn't get a job and you can't figure it out, move on. Don't ponder it and say, listen, the next opportunity will present itself. That's why volunteering is important because it gives you access to a lot of people you wouldn't see in a job. And when you meet these people and they start to chat with you, talk to them, find out what they're about. Have a few important questions to know that so they know you're listening to them. And so you can pick up some information. And if somebody says to you, hey, nice conversation, I hope to see you around this office again. And you make sure to find out when they're back, without being too obvious, and say, hey, how you doing? And you continue that, build that relationship. It's all about networking. It's all about building relationships. And one of the things people know me in New York for is bringing people together. I always like bringing people together. So, if Miss Fajamola was in New York and she was in a class and I met her at an event, I might bring her to another event and introduce her to other people. So we build our network. For people young and coming from the global South, it is important that you find mentors within your own community, mentors who are like you, but it's always helpful to have mentors from outside. And the volunteer position oftentimes exposes you to those mentors. And it gives you an opportunity to develop those relationships. And when you feel comfortable with somebody, there's no need to say to them, hey, are you my mentor? It already is an understanding. And I'm doing that a lot with people from my university. I go to meetings there and they'll have young people who are doing, handing out documents or talking or assisting people. And we start to chat. And I give them my card and I say, hey, listen, if you ever want something exciting to do, and I have building a whole team of young interns, undergraduate and graduate school interns in New York that want to do some of the work I do. If I had time, I would show you some of the things we're putting together, some of the products and PowerPoints and reports and things. But we have a reputation now in the Red Cross that if something difficult needs to be done, they say, call that guy in New York, Mr. Bernstein, he'll get it done for you and it'll be done very well. So I don't want to self-aggrandize or make myself bigger than I am, but I think it's partially the fact that I've learned to work with people, and I can go into a room and feel comfortable with people who are different than me. So I'm going to leave it at that. I spoke for about a half an hour, and I'm certainly honored to have had Ms. Fanjamola invite me to this discussion. I always love talking to young people, but I don't like to talk too much because then, what's that? And I'm more than willing to take questions from anybody on the call. I know you might have a question for me, right? Before I get going, Ms. Fajambola, and then we'll see if anybody else does. And, I'm out there, and anybody who wants to reach out to me, I'll leave my email in the chat. If you ever want to work with us in New York, even though you're far away, that doesn't mean anything because everything is electronic now, right? Everything
Yes.
since the pandemic, we meet online. So, hey, I'll leave my email and you can reach out to me at any time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Robert. Thank you so much for sharing your career journey and also sharing your volunteering journey. What most people don't know that is the Red Cross majorly is staffed by volunteers. So, and I'm glad to bring you on board as the second speaker for this session because the research reporters are majorly, for now, they are majorly volunteers. They are not paid volunteers for now because it's a young civic organization, a young non-governmental organization, and we don't have the grants yet, the funding yet to say, okay, our research reporters will pay them. So currently, they are all volunteers. And as someone who has volunteered for a long while, close to a decade now, I would want to ask you, because you have more experience, you've been a leader, your profile on LinkedIn has so much on volunteering, and that's why I gave you the topic. How will you advise young people to tackle challenges they might experience on volunteering in terms of interaction with other people? Because our research reporters will be interacting with global citizens in the communities in maybe in religious organizations or in any institution or maybe in public. How do you advise them to what advice do you have for them to tackle challenges they might face interacting with other people?
Well, it's a very, very wonderful and excellent question. And I think, coming from my Red Cross experience, it's something that we do. Hold on one second, please. I'll be right back.
Okay, let's wait for Mr. Roberts to come back. Please, if you have any questions, please prepare your questions so that at most we are done by 6 p.m. West African time as we allocated. The recording to this session will be available. We are going to put it on our YouTube channel.
Hi, I'm back. Unfortunately, because of the snowstorm, we can't go to the store. The store is closed, so they're bringing all the stuff to us. And I just had a guy; he didn't know what to do. So, anyway, let me get back to that question. I'm sorry for interrupting you. Did you want to?
Fine.
Okay, so that's a very, very important. It's a great question because I encounter that every day at the Red Cross, within the Red Cross and from the outside. And because of the Red Cross's position or the Red Crescent movement's positions in the world, there are a lot of people that look at us and they say, "Yeah, you do great work. If there's a fire or a flood, but I don't like the way your politics are. You don't do what I want you to do politically." And I think one of the things we have to learn in this world is that we're here to do something that focuses on helping people. Now, I'm not going to be ever a person that sits there in a room and says, everybody who works at the Red Cross is an angel or a saint or a wonderful human being or thinks the same way. And I know she's laughing because that's the way it is in the world. You work in organizations and you have a whole variety of people. And sometimes you have to figure out ways to operate with people who you don't see eye to eye on, number one, or you can tell they don't see eye to eye with you and they don't want to engage with you, or they want to engage with you is only so far as they have to and nothing more. And what I would say to people is have an open mind, number one. Understand that everybody's not going to see you the same way that you see yourself or as your colleagues see you, your positive colleagues. And I'll give you an experience. A few years ago, when I was working for Rapporteurs, they sent me down to Washington, D.C. to interview this young guy from Nigeria who had come up with an app so that people who were traveling could find out where a restaurant was in the country they were going to and make the reservation. So if they were flying, let's say they were going to Nairobi in 2 weeks, they would know all the restaurants in Nairobi and they could start making restaurant reservations in New York for the days they arrived in Nairobi. And he was a young guy, young Nigerian guy. And I remember his first name was Chinedu. I can't remember his last name. And this Chinedu was being interviewed, and they sent me to DC to interview him. And I said to him, I was here to interview this guy. And he looks at me and he says to me, and all of the people in New York, all of the writers and journalists, he said, you couldn't find one Nigerian writer to interview me. They had to send, what was the term he said? A Muzungu to interview me. And I know that, I know that, those of you who are on the call know what that means. It's a kind of a negative term for a Western person, a white person. And I said to him, I really don't appreciate that. I came all the way down here to interview you. And, he says, well, it's an African magazine run by Africans. And who do I have? He goes, I have you coming to New York. I said, that's fine. Would you like me not to do the interview? I didn't get angry at him. You called me. I said, okay, that's fine, sir. It's legitimate. That's how you feel. It's your opinion. Would you like me not to do the interview? So then he says to me, he says, you're here already. Let's do the damn interview. And at first he was angry, and I would ask him a question, and it would be yes, no, maybe. And then suddenly I started asking him questions, and he warmed up a bit. And we finished the interview. The interview went into the magazine as a public, and we took some pictures and everything. And I wouldn't say in the next day or two he became a friend of mine, but we ran into each other a couple of times later. And he introduced me. I was at a gala in New York for an organization, and he introduced me to a few people. And he started to say, this guy really understands us. So I say to you, be open-minded, understand not everybody's going to see you for the way they should see you. Somebody a lot of times looks at the outside and makes their mind up. Do what you can do. If you're sent to do, say, an interview with somebody and you find they're hostile to you, do the best interview you can and don't escalate things. Try to be very, very calm and professional. And, if it gets to a point where the person says, I don't want you to interview me and gets up and walks out, there's nothing you can do. That's life. And don't look at it as a failure. Look at it as that person has some issue that you can't deal with. I always look at people who come to me in a hostile fit. That's your issue. If somebody says to me, this is what I want out of this, I say to them, that's good. You have goals. And they said, well, you're going to give me that, right? I say, life is life. I can't control life. I can't control relationships. But especially in volunteer occupations where you're learning, you may be challenged. People may see you, your appearance, what you wear, how you approach them is different. And the only time I would say to you to be very concerned is if they start to do anything that's physical or insulting to you. So, if somebody says to me, I don't want you to interview me because you're an ugly guy, listen, do you want the interview or not? If it's a woman, I don't want to be interviewed by a woman, or I don't want to be interviewed by a woman from this particular group or religion. That's not something you have to deal with. You get up and you say professionally, I'm sorry to hear that, sir. I guess we'll have to rearrange this interview for another time. And please never, ever let anybody get you so angry that when you walk out of there, you're yelling at the person, because you never know down the road when you might encounter that person in another role and another time. But also be aware of that person and let the people who assign you the job know, I don't want to go back and interview that person because they're not understanding of me. And it's a very, very tough time in the world because I was always raised to accept people for who they are and understand other cultures. And a lot of people in the world today don't see it that way. Not only in the United States, but in the other parts of the world. You know, people in the North may see people in the South. Those people in the North, they're not the kind of people I want to mix with. And I've never felt that way. And I've met so many wonderful people. And rather than, just digress, but one of the things I did in the course of the work I did was volunteering before the Red Cross. I met a wonderful man named Dr. Uchenna Ekwo. He's a Nigerian, and he runs an organization, an NGO called Center for Media and Peace Initiatives. And I wanted to interview him, and it didn't come about. And then a few years later, I met him at a meeting, and he changed business cards with me. And now I work with him, and we're very close. And he calls upon me for stuff, and he's asked me to handle things for him. So life is like that. Also, remember, volunteering is not a straight path to the job. I mean, you work for an organization, you think you can work there, you may not ever work there, but you also have that experience. But understand that your path as a volunteer may not be a straight path as you can see from mine. So I gave you a long answer, but hopefully it gave you a lot of information too.
Thank you
Okay,
so much. I just
you're
realized
welcome.
that. Thank you so much, Mr. Robert, for taking us through that out of face challenges, which is, I feel, that's the major deal as a volunteer. So, research reporters, if you have any question, please ask Mr. Robert. I'm sure he's open. The floor is yours to answer any question you have.
Hello again, everybody.
Hi.
Yeah, hello, Salma.
Thank you, Mr. Robert, for the very insightful session. I have a question on volunteering.
Sure, absolutely.
So a lot of volunteering opportunities here in Kenya. I'm gonna speak in Kenya because that's the only thing I know.
Understood.
So a lot of volunteering around here, you just gain experience from it. There's usually no like monetary value that you get from it. Yeah. So a lot of us like do volunteering services, especially in the medical field. We do medical camps, we do all that. So I just wanted to ask, like, how do you like strike a balance between like volunteering and also earning a sustainable living for yourself? Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Um, when I was working in the New York City schools, you can imagine that was a very stressful job. We worked from 8 o'clock into 3. Everybody says, "Oh, you only worked half a day." I tell them that half a day, 8 to 3, was as bad as your 9 to 6 and 9 to 7, because the energy you spent, and the perspiration and the sweating and the dealing, and having to work with things, takes a lot out of you. Any career does. And then you have a commitment to volunteer. You have to always make sure that your needs financially are taken care of. And you cannot allow a volunteer job to become the controlling factor in your life. I'm retired now. I saved a lot of money when I was working full time, so I'm able, because I'm retired, to have the time to volunteer. But that doesn't mean that I should be going there and doing it like a full time job. And for a while, the second year, 2023, and going into early 25, I was working sometimes 40 hours a week on Red Cross stuff. And my family, my friends, my significant other was saying to me, "You're working more now than when you were working for money." And the problem with a volunteering job is, if you do great work, uh, they want more out of you, because they need you to cover more things, and you're covering more and more things. And Ms. Fajambola, you may speak to this from your experience, because you've been volunteering for a decade. You may find yourself in a position where you're working directly with the executive director of that NGO, but you're not making any money. You're getting nothing out of it. Yes, they may offer you lunch. They may take you on an important meeting to meet a government official. They may make sure that you have, if you need a new this or a new that, a new computer. I mean, yeah, I got a computer from the organization. I have shirts, I have jackets, vests, hats, pins, every kind of bottle for water. But that's, who cares? I could start a store with all the shirts and bottles of water that I have. I think the thing is you have to strike that balance and you have to be very clear. And number one, I tell young people, when you're in a volunteer position and you're going to professional school, a graduate program, journalism, law school, medical school, that's number one. And you cannot allow that volunteer job to encroach upon that. And yes, sometimes it's tough. You give up opportunities as a volunteer that you think would be great opportunities and great experiences because I have to go to class or I have to, go to my job or I have to make sure that, my brothers and sisters come home from school. They're there and it's the same time as this opportunity. The one good thing I can say to you now is because everything is so electronic, oftentimes you can go to a meeting online. So maybe you're at home watching those younger siblings, you can still get on your computer and listen to the meeting as well as, and sometimes the meetings are recorded. So, there may be some things you have to give up, but you must always make sure that you have financial power to live your life so that you can eat and survive and not even survive, but to live a life where you can come home and you have a place to live and, things to do. So it's a balance. And sometimes it's a tough balance and sometimes you have to sacrifice. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it
Salma?
did. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Please, research reporters, do you have more questions for Mr. Robert? Mr. Robert sent his email. If you want his official email address, he sent it in the chat. Please be respectful. If you have to send a mail to Mr. Robert, be professional as much as you can. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So since it seems there are no questions, no contributions anymore, thank you so much, Mr. Robert Bernstein, for yes. You want to say more?
Oh, me?
Yes, I saw your
No,
hands up.
no,
No, okay.
I was just waving goodbye. I wanted to let
Okay.
everybody, it was an
Thank
honor
you
and
so much for
it was,
sharing your expertise and your time with us. Thank you so much.
sure.
Be as realistic as possible. And I wanted them to listen and learn from the perspective of someone who has been coordinated a lot of volunteering work across the globe. So thank you so much once again for your time. So research reporters, this is like an appetizer to the main dish. As I said, research reporters, research. So the second session, which is on 1st March, is on research. That is the main meal. This is like an appetizer to the main meal you are going to have. So that's why we have a lot of storytelling, a lot of perspective on career journey to see what is visible in the role you are taking. If you are to work with us, and I'm optimistic, not just people in this call, but people who wish to volunteer for the organization beyond this call will gain intensively from what we have for you. This is the first. I don't want to speak so much on the program till the second session when we'll elaborate and shed more light on what this program is about. But this is the first globally. First research reporters program globally, and we're going to do things differently from how it has been done and what people in the sphere of health and the sphere of research understand. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Thank you so much for everyone who spoke, who answered in the comment section, who contributed. The civic organization, the NGO, is focused on making research understandable and creating a legacy. And this legacy cannot be created by me or the advisory board or the board of directors or advisory council alone. We can't do it alone. We need people on board and people who are willing to share their time and expertise like you. So thank you so much, research reporters, for joining us on the first session of this inaugural 2-day virtual workshop on the Fajambola Initiative for Science and Technology. So have a great week, everyone, and see you on the second session on Sunday. I can't wait to see a fuller room. I can't wait to discuss with a fuller room. So have a blessed week, everyone.